Outright panic broke out in Crimea after the Ukrainian armed forces finally took full fire control over all land logistics between occupied Crimea and mainland Ukraine.
We stood in line for almost 4 hours. We had about 500 meters left to reach the pump and refuel, but the gasoline ran out.
And what's the point of Crimea at all if you can't go anywhere? I'm leaving. I hope the bridge won't be blown up before I leave. The land route is completely blocked.
Gasoline is becoming a real shortage here.
The fuel situation in Crimea, the Crimean resellers, in my opinion, have completely lost their damn minds. It's a total mess.
Guys, a complete one too, an absolute mess. Everyone knows the situation that's happening in Crimea right now. It's really very sad and unpleasant. So, I just have a question. How is it that in a situation like this, when people are facing some kind of disaster or problem, some people suddenly show an unbelievable entrepreneurial streak? Right by the bridge in Temriuk, they're selling gasoline standing there for 350 rubles per liter. I want to ask, are you out of your minds? What are you doing? You're making money off others' misery and misfortune.
Salt, sugar, some types of grains, and flour have started to disappear from store shelves in Crimea. There's less and less gasoline at gas stations, and now Russians are storming train stations, trying to somehow leave Crimea, and accordingly, there are no tourists to be seen there at all. And now experts are saying that Ukrainian forces are currently blocking several bridges connecting the occupied Kherson region with Crimea. Thus, the armed forces of Ukraine are destroying key Russian logistical routes to the peninsula and creating obstacles for the enemy's further advance. But it seems that this is just the beginning. Analysts are confident that continued Ukrainian strikes will have cascading effects on the battlefield and complicate Russia's preparations for offensive operations. Meanwhile, the armed forces of Ukraine stated that after Ukrainian defense forces significantly damaged the bridges leading into Crimea from the Kherson region, the Russian occupiers set up a number of pontoon crossings. But this only partially solves the problem for them, while at the same time creating additional danger, because now the Ukrainian armed forces will simply destroy the crossings in already known locations. So let's start with what's happening in Crimea today after the destruction of logistics from mainland Ukraine to Crimea. In Crimea, which is occupied by Russia, there has been an increased demand for essential goods, resulting in salt, sugar, certain types of grains, and flour starting to disappear from store shelves. Suppliers who bring these goods through the land corridor are applying a higher coefficient to the cost of delivering products to the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea. So, in other words, products are available in the temporarily occupied territory of Crimea, but their prices are significantly higher than in the Russian Federation. Moreover, gasoline prices there have also gone up, and it has reached the point where Moscow has already started forcing Russian gasoline sellers in Crimea to lower their prices, saying, yes, there is no gasoline, but at least show reasonable prices. This is all connected once again to the huge risks involved in supplies. They understand that the entire so-called land corridor through southern Ukraine to Crimea is now under the full fire control of the armed forces of Ukraine. And it's also worth remembering that Ukrainian forces are currently blocking several bridges connecting the occupied Kherson region with Crimea. Thus, the armed forces of Ukraine are destroying the Russians' logistical routes to the peninsula and creating obstacles for the occupiers' further advance. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War are discussing the impact of Ukrainian strikes today. I'll pause to examine their analysis further. In particular, the analysts remind us that the head of the occupation forces in the Kherson region, Vladimir Saldo, stated back on June 11 that Ukrainian forces did indeed strike several bridges connecting the occupied Kherson region and Crimea. And in particular, the strike hit the bridge over the North Crimean Canal near the occupied settlements of Preobrazhenka and Mirny, the Perkop-Armyansk road bridge, and the road bridge in Stavki. These bridges cross the North Crimean Canal and run along the M17 highway from Armyansk to Oleshki. That is indeed the logistics connecting mainland Ukraine with Crimea are being completely disrupted. Moreover, the Institute noted that, for example, on June 11, the Ukrainian armed forces not only struck at logistics, but also damaged or destroyed about 50 Russian military trucks carrying fuel and ammunition. And here it's interesting that now the Russians are completely exposed, as they say. Quoting the Institute for the Study of War. A commander of the armed forces of Ukraine stated that Russian troops have redirected their logistics to the Armyansk route. After the Ukrainian strikes on the night of June 7th to 8th and on June 9th, which damaged the Chonhar Bridge, the movement across it was blocked by the occupying authorities. According to him, previous strikes forced Russian troops to supply the Huliapol direction using routes from Crimea instead of the occupied Donetsk region. Ukrainian troops are ramping up their campaign of medium-range strikes on Russian logistics routes in the occupied south. Ukraine is disrupting Russia's ability to safely use supply routes from Russia to the occupied Crimea. The continued Ukrainian strikes will have cascading effects on the battlefield and may complicate Russia's preparations for offensive operations. The point is that Ukraine's defense forces have delivered critical strikes on the Chonhar Bridge, destroying it down to its supports. That is, in fact, it will be almost impossible to restore it. They also destroyed the crossing in Azerbaijan. This has completely cut off the Russian Federation's land logistics along the route that Russians call Novorossiya. And according to the commander of the Unmanned Systems Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Robert Brody Magyar, Ukraine has seriously begun to implement a plan to isolate, or if you prefer, blockade the occupied Crimea, thanks to the Ukrainian strike campaign. Over the past month, traffic on the highway connecting Rostov-on-Don, Russian, then the occupied Mariupol, Melitopol, and Crimea has decreased by almost two-thirds, by 71% if you count correctly. Magyar is convinced that within the next month Ukraine will already have full control over this road, and accordingly the land corridor will disappear. And after the Ukrainian armed forces significantly damaged the bridges at the entrance to Crimea from the Kherson region, the Russian occupiers set up nearby pontoon crossings. This is very similar to the situation in the Kherson region. Remember, in 2022, when the bridges were also being destroyed, then the Russians tried to build crossings, the crossings were hit, and then they were simply forced to flee. And building pontoon crossings only partially solves this problem for the Russians, while at the same time creating additional danger. Because a pontoon bridge obviously slows down movement, which can allow Ukraine to attack military convoys at a moment when they are much easier to destroy. So, in fact, it's like a clearly drawn target. As soon as this equipment enters the pontoon crossing, they strike, and drones can observe around the clock. Ah, right. And what's important to note is that everyone in the Kremlin sees this, they're panicking, they're angry. The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin announced an intensification of strikes on Ukraine amid Russia's failures at the front. And although it is Russia that is the aggressor, the escalation is intensifying, you bold bastard, and it's a failure. The unwashed bastard Vladimir Putin called these retaliatory actions. So, commenting on the Ukrainian strikes on Russian military factories, on the oil industry, on the occupiers in Crimea, well, Putin assured that these facilities are being restored very quickly. And therefore, there are no problems here. He says, so what if our oil refineries were destroyed? He says, there are no problems there. Here is his quote. They can't cause us any serious problems. We must, and this is the next task, respond to them properly. And we will do it. And we will increase our strikes on the enemy's infrastructure in such a way as to discourage them from attacking our civilian sites. They will not succeed in dividing our society or causing us economic harm. And here is this interesting statement from Putin. So, when he says that the goal of dividing society will not be achieved, it means that this division of society has already begun, and he has noticed it. He saw that these wild Russians have suddenly started to realize, oh, so this is what war is like. It turns out that the war has reached us too. It turns out that Ukraine, which Putin has supposedly demilitarized about 500 times already, is actually becoming stronger and stronger. New types of weapons are appearing, new opportunities to strike all across Russia. Well, I'll leave it at that for now, friends. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. And if you want to subscribe to Alexei Pechi's Ukrainian language YouTube channel, the link is in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. Subtitles.